What's going on, guys? Student Dr. Check here. Welcome back to another video. I'm going to help you use Anki to the fullest possible potential if you're starting medical school. Let's get right into this, but first, if you're new, definitely consider subscribing. Anki is really useful because it allows you to create and use flashcards in order to study subjects in the long term. If you use Anki consistently for the content matter that you're learning in class, it helps with long-term reinforcement of the material. So we're going to be covering how to create cards, use them, and have specific decks that you need so that you can substantiate your learning in medical school. Now, I'm going to assume that you already have the application and stuff, so I'm not going to talk about how to install Anki onto your hard drive. Instead, I'm going to talk about the features of Anki that are most conducive to productive learning. If you don't have Anki, pause this video and go watch this other video to learn how to install it properly. The link is in the description below. One of the best features of Anki is that you can create flashcards based on the different card types that they have to offer. Now, I'm going to break down the important card types that you can use for medical school. And those three are Cloze Deletions, Image Occlusion Enhanced, and Front and Back. Front and back cards are probably the least useful. I'm probably not going to go that much in depth into how to use those cards, but for completion's sake, I'll include it. Honestly, the Cloze Delation card is probably the best to use in medical school, and that's because it allows you to create fill-in-the-blank cards. You can use Cloze Deletions for specific topics or specific notes that you have created while you were learning in class. Okay, so let's start with viewing what an actual Cloze Delation card looks like. So I'm just gonna go to the block that I just completed, which is block 4. Sure, let's look at pharmacology. So beta blockers. So this is an example of how beta blockers work on the peripheral vasculature, right? So if I click through it and by hitting spacebar, this is basically talking about like the mechanism of action. As you can see at the bottom right here, we have different increments. So if you hit these different buttons, it repeats a card based on how difficult you find that specific note that you're covering. So if we look right here, if I hit again, it'll repeat it after 1 minute. If I hit it hard, then it'll do after 8 minutes. If I do good, it'll do 15 minutes and then so on. To get there, you'd have to go to options and change the amount of steps that you would take to get to add those intervals, right? So for this one card, right? So if I go to browse and look at this card, this one card has 4 specific parts that are blocked off, which means that there's 4 separate cards for this one note that I'm covering. Let's say I want to create a new card, right? I just hit add because I'm already in the deck. My name is Student Dr. Shack. I go to VCOM and I don't know, I like puppies. All right, so in these 3 statements, if I highlight whatever I have and I do Shift, Command, and C, it'll create a Cloze Delation. So you can see a Cloze Delation is just represented by this C1 type of formatting that's around the words that you're highlighting. And same thing for VCOM and puppies, right? If I put Cloze Deletions around those, then it's using Shift, Command, C again to add more Cloze Deletions to this specific note. The numbers that you see right here is the amount of separate cards that it's going to create. The more times you add Cloze Deletions, the more cards it's going to create for a specific note. So you can imagine if you had a particular mechanism of action or some kind of note for any of your other classes, it allows you to see that same note multiple different times in specific ways so that you have to recall parts of that note using the Cloze Deletion feature, which is great. The more Cloze Deletions that you have, the more separate cards are generated to block off specific sections of that note. You're learning the same concept or the same note in 2 or 3 or whatever number of times that you hit the Cloze Delation. And I think this feature is super helpful for classes like anatomy, especially topics that allow you to relate anatomical structures to each other. I found it super helpful for pharmacology and microbiology as well, because these classes require you to learn some straight hard facts about drugs and microbes, respectively. Image Occlusion Enhanced is a feature of Anki for making cards that are centered around images, or these figures that you're going to be using in medical school. They're sort of like the Cloze Deletion function, where instead of blocking off chunks of text, you can block off aspects of the image and like literally put boxes around them to cover parts of an image. All right, let's run it. I'm just gonna pull an example off of one of the lectures from block 3, which is neuroscience. Like, let's say I wanted to take this image right here and make a Image Occlusion Enhanced out of that, right? I'm gonna screenshot it first, right? I'm gonna go over here and add a card or something like that, right? So what I usually do is I move this window and I put it in the same box as my lecture slides, and then I hit this little window right here, so that pulls up the Image Occlusion Enhanced function for the deck that you're on. So in this case, this is the screenshot that I just did. So what I'll do is I'll bring this up and then I'll start, this rectangular box is already highlighted, so what I'll do is start drawing rectangular boxes like this. All right, So the first thing that I do is if I want to see each individual rectangle one at a time and the rest of the image is present, what I'll do is hit hide one, guess one. All right, so that means these 13 cards were just added. If I wanted to see what I just added to this deck, I'm gonna go over here and we can see that these boxes have just been added one at a time for every single label structure in this image. So I'll just go through, if I just cycle through all of these, right, I can just go through these structures one by one and just cover a lot of information in that particular way. Image occlusion enhance is probably best used for classes like anatomy, where, as you saw, you can take any labeled structure and then block off the words that point to those structures. But it doesn't just have to be anatomy. In my experience, I used image occlusion enhance for pharmacology too, because I could learn flow process charts that detail the logical steps needed to be used for specific drug therapies based on whatever stage of disease a patient is at. You can even use it for biochem and stuff, where you learn biochemical pathways. Anything with a helpful image can be made into cards using this specific feature, and that's why I think it's great in medical school. The front and back cards are your traditional flashcards that you can use on Anki. Everything that's on the back side of the card, you basically have to learn all of that information. And if you're dealing with a huge chunk of information as one note, it's not really helpful because it takes a lot of mental energy and a lot of time to grind through all those big chunks of text. And since there's a lot of information that you need to know, front and back cards are just not going to be helpful, especially in my experience, because you end up just copying and pasting paragraphs and chunks of text and expect it to just enter your brain after a couple of tries. If you want to make cards, you're probably going to be taking information from your lecture slides and then consolidating it into a bunch of Anki decks. This is what I did throughout all of my first year of medical school. It was tough at first because all of my Anki decks were just thrown into one specific deck for that class. But this method is just way too daunting and overwhelming because it's just so much information, and it's honestly kind of discouraging going through every single card, especially in a time crunch. You might just be better off to divide Anki decks based on the exams that you have to take. At my medical school, and we have 2 to 3 exams every single week. So with all that material that is required for preparation for those exams, you need to be very organized with how you structure your Anki. I create decks based on exam and then subdivide those decks into specific lectures that are in that exam. Now here's where you have to manage your time pretty well. First of all, if I know that I'm going to be using Anki, I'm not going to wait until 3 to 4 days before an exam is happening. I'm not going to make cards for 2 days, and then with 2 days remaining, I'm not going to go through every single Anki deck that I create. That's ridiculous. If you cram Anki 2 days before an actual exam, it's just not going to stick. That's just me. That's my take on that. You should be doing your Anki decks as soon as you make them. So if you're preparing for an exam, start about 7 to 9 days out. The second thing, only be sure to make cards for the class lectures that actually need them. You can easily get tunnel vision into making Anki for every single lecture that's on an exam. For me, some classes require a lot of Anki just to learn the material, especially anatomy. Every class lecture for anatomy will have me making cards. I don't even watch the lectures most of the time. I just go through all the slides and make Anki cards out of it. But for other classes that are inherently conceptual, Anki won't exactly work over there because it's not so much about learning the hard facts, it's about being able to piece information and create like an internal web of how the information connects to one another. My point is you need to pick and choose when to use Anki based on the lecture that you get. The last thing that you want to do is create Anki cards that don't really help you learn the material and then waste your time doing those cards only to not be effective on exam day. I would recommend previewing the slides before the actual class lecture happens so that you can figure out whether the content really requires you making Anki cards or not. And if so, keep a mental note of what slides require you to invest time in creating cards. Now, these key points apply to people differently. Some people will use Anki 100% of the time to learn 60 to 70 to maybe even 80% of the lecture class material, and that's okay. Other people will figure out that Anki just won't work for them no matter the class, and that's also okay. Alright, last thing to cover in this video is to download this big Anki deck called AnKing. If you don't know, AnKing is literally the holy grail of Anki decks that's specifically used in medical school. Some dude named AnKing consolidated cards that are made out of several study resources. So this includes UWorld, the Step 1 book, the Fundamentals of Pathology textbook, and even a lot of videos that med students use to study for Step 1, like Sketchy, Pathoma, Pixarize, and Boards and Beyond. I would encourage you to download this deck because you can suspend and unsuspend cards from this deck that are more relevant to whatever exam that you're covering. Alright, so let's go over that. So the first thing that you have to do is go to Browse, go all the way down on the left side of your sidebar, the left sidebar, go all the way down, and you'll come to this one section under the Anki tags, which is it's the AnKing Step 1 deck after you have it downloaded. So then from here you can kind of access a lot of the other resources that you are going to be using for Step 1 later on. So this would be Pathoma, Physio, Sketchy, biochem, micro, path, you name it. So let's say if I'm studying sketchy micro, I would come down to the specific micro that I'm studying. So in this case, if it was bacteria, I could go to the gram positives, the gram negatives. What I would have to do is click on one of the cards in those tags and hit Command A. And then from there, we right click and do toggle suspend, which basically unselects the suspend option. So it reveals all the cards that are in this tag. You can basically systematically unsuspend cards, unsuspend all the relevant tags that will pertain to whatever you're studying. Anki is probably the best tool to use in medical school because it allows you to reinforce your learning as you cover your classes. Obviously, making cards is a time-consuming process, let alone going through all of those cards on top of the classes that you have to attend. It's not an exact science, and you kind of have to play around with it based on how it'll help with your studying. But I hope this video provides enough pieces of advice that'll help you structure your studying in a meaningful way. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for your support. Comment below if you thought this video was helpful at all, or if you want me to make another Anki related video. Hey, we also just broke 200 subscribers. I love the support, and it's really encouraging me to make even more content for you guys, whether it's vlogs or how-to tutorials or just shorts in general. As always, I like keeping it real with you. Peace.